Schaefer. I'm the Associate Director for Graduate Student Success and Professional Development with the Graduate School, and this is our final Career Pathways guest speaker session for the spring semester. And I am very pleased to introduce our next guest speaker. So I'm going to, of course, as I do with all of our guest speakers, read his bio, and then I have just a couple additional comments before we start Clark's discussion. So Clark's career spans 30 years following his passion in the health and human services nonprofit space. His tenure includes 11 years with the American Red Cross locally, regionally, nationally, and internationally, 9 years in developmental disability communities in the US and Indonesia, 2 years working in rural counties focusing on mental behavioral health service delivery and equity, and 3 years as a pro bono consultant for NGOs across US, Africa, and Australia. Clark has served as a chief operating officer through the majority of his career, at times overseeing a combination of IT, finance, fundraising, programs, human resources and facilities, maintenance, and fleet. He has a bachelor's in history from Texas Tech University and a master's in public administration from the University of Oklahoma. Clark is a native Californian. He and his wife raised 2 awe-inspiring adult children. And on a side note, and for posterity, since this is being recorded, this is definitely a full circle moment for me, and I think even for Clark. Last year, I was able to coin the professional term and practice of transformative networking, and presented that at a conference. And the concept is you develop a relationship with someone professionally, and due to nurturing that relationship over time, it keeps giving back to you personally and professionally, and creates this wonderful dynamic and wonderful relationship. Well, the pinnacle of that concept is this moment right now. And because Clark Jensen is the person that gave me, at the age of 22 years old, as I'm trying to hold it together, at the age of 22 years old, gave me a job with the American Red Cross Youth Services, a brand new position, a very green 22-year-old, I might add, in the American Red Cross Youth Services Department, along with Jennifer. And I was charged with developing and managing 2 youth programs. And that's where my start in program development. I just found out that I had a knack for it and loved it. And that's where my start in program development started. And honestly, it's no small thing to say that that is exactly what I do over the span of my career in higher education. And that is what, for to say that Clark gave me my career now is, and that time gave me my career is nothing short of correct. I've given presentations or developed presentations and given presentations over public speaking, leadership 101, empowerment and leadership, and leadership and communication. All the while, it was always in the back of my mind of what would Clark do, and always use him as an example because he was my first and best example of what a leader of a team is. And so I am very pleased to welcome our guest speaker, Clark Jensen.
John, thank you for that. I really appreciate you giving me the opportunity to speak with you today. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. But on a side note, John may have been green when he was 22, but he had these long, flowing, golden locks of hair at that time. You might not recognize that now, but that was certainly the case when he was 22.
And this over 30 years has been the relationship, which I absolutely love, along with Jennifer and I don't think there's any of them in here today, but our youth volunteers, which we affectionately refer to as our kids. But Clark, let's go back, since I've kind of touched a little bit on it. Let's start at the beginning, and let's start about your start in nonprofit. So why specifically nonprofit?
Yeah, absolutely, John. If I could take one step back first, just to set some context, and I really just want to speak briefly about what is a nonprofit, what a nonprofit isn't. I really encourage my staff and remind them that uh, our organizations that we work for are not, they're not charities. They're businesses. And they're businesses that do charitable work. But without the business, we couldn't do the charitable work. And I share that because nonprofits and for-profits share an immense number of similarities together, whether it be back office support like IT, whether it be the need to generate revenue. The differences really have to do with a nonprofit has a volunteer board that he oversees the governance of the organization. Nonprofits can fundraise and also have contracts with federal government, state, local governments. They can also have relationships, or they depend on relationships with other organizations in the community to do their work. So aside from that, you're still running a business, an important business in an area of focus that you've joined. And let me give you just a couple of quick examples. We've all watched Netflix, and I happen to be in the middle of the three body problem right now. But the Netflix model is membership. That's what their business is. Well, an analog in the nonprofit world would be Boy Scouts. Their business model is based on membership. Another example may be, I'll use Walmart, for instance. Walmart's business model is logistics, and that's how they give us those falling prices. Um, in the nonprofit world, an analog would be Girl Scout cookies. Their business is logistics of getting those cookies to you. They also have a membership angle as well. And then one final example, if you may be familiar with Scholastic Press, which, as their name suggests, they're a publishing house. And if anyone's read a Harry Potter book, then you've been involved with Scholastic Press. Well, their model obviously is book sales. Um, in the nonprofit world, I'll use the Red Cross as an example. Aside from disaster relief, the Red Cross's business model is selling books as part of classes. So that really is what drives their operations, on a day-to-day basis. So I wanted to set that context just, so we understand what a nonprofit is, how it works. The one other thing I would add is that nonprofits, in my case, I focused on health and human services, but that's not the only area nonprofits can be found. They can be found in religious institutions, whether it be mosques, synagogues, churches. They are also organizations like the San Antonio Museum of Art, SAMA, is a nonprofit. They can be organizations that focus on advocacy, that may be environmentalism, for instance, or social justice. They can also be organizations that focus, specifically on giving. So foundations are nonprofits. So nonprofits aren't just one, small area. And sometimes I think people forget that, but they're very broad in terms of the type of a nonprofit, you may want to join, you may want to focus on. So John, I just wanted to give that context to kind of get us started out. But my nonprofit career, it really started for me when I was in college. I was attending a school in Chicago, and for every credit hour of a class you took, you had to do, or you were required to do, a credit hour of volunteerism in the community. So, a 12-hour semester meant 12 hours of volunteerism in the community. And that's really where my journey started, working in some emergency overnight shelters, working with aftercare programs with youth, with adults. And that would really, guide me to eventually where I am here today. I would join the Red Cross in Tulsa, and I'm going to refer to the Red Cross too many times. So if you hear a city like Tulsa or DC or LA, that's all Red Cross. So I joined in Tulsa. I came aboard with this wonderful person, Jennifer Phillip, who's on the call today. She was overseeing this very extraordinary, intricate series of programs in schools and a leadership program. We found John, and he was a wonderful addition to the team. And we kind of became known as the Three Musketeers. We were those kids down at the end of the hallway that no one knew exactly what we were doing and didn't think that it really mattered that much. So it allowed us really to do a lot of things under the radar, which was fantastic in terms of we didn't necessarily know what the rules were, so we really weren't breaking them, but it also kind of didn't hinder us. A couple of things about Tulsa. Uh, we were able to create new programming. Jennifer and I created this overseas exchange program with the Red Cross in Russia and Magen David Adom and the Red Crescent in Israel, in the Gaza area. John worked very creatively on a after-school program that didn't exist prior to John coming on board. And this was taking high school and middle school youth, training them in leadership, and then having them go out to schools in communities of color and underrepresented areas of northern Tulsa, where they would teach young children, kindergarten, pre-kindergarten children, about safety in the home. And one side note, I was asked one day to actually drive the kids out there. John wasn't available. So I did. And after their session, they came out and I asked them, how was it? How did it go? And they were like, yeah, it's fine. And I said, well, okay, if it's fine, what happened? And they said, well, John's not here. When is he going to be back to actually drive us next time? Which I didn't take personally. But I used that as an example, and I used the example of Jennifer and I creating the overseas programs in terms of one of the most important things as a leader is surrounding yourself with really smart, creative, fun people. And both John and Jennifer were that, and I think that's why we were so successful as a team working in the Tulsa area.
So with that, during our couple conversations about this session, you went into the Red Cross as a director of a department, the leader of a team, and not just the leader of a team of two full-time professionals, but a huge cadre of youth volunteers, and supervising all that and numerous programs throughout. And I know you mentioned that being thrust into a director position, kind of your not only your foray into into a full-time nonprofit, but also in leadership, and that some aspects of imposter syndrome seeped in. Can you expound on that?
Yes, absolutely. When I came into the role, I had very little experience in leadership or managing people. So I was coming into an area that I knew very little about. As I mentioned, I had some great partners in this journey with John and Jennifer, and that made things so much easier. But I was also coming into a situation where I wasn't just managing a department, staff, and volunteers, but I was also having to manage laterally. So other directors at my level, I was having to work with them. I was by far one of the youngest, so that was kind of a challenge. And I also had to manage up to my CEO. So I was managing in all these various directions, trying to drive what we were doing forward. And I shared with John, I think just recently, he hadn't known that every Sunday night when I was in that role, most Sunday nights, I couldn't go to sleep because I was so worried about what was going to happen at work tomorrow. And not that anything happened per se, but John, as you said, imposter syndrome. I just knew everyone was going to see that I didn't know what I was doing, and was really worried about being seen in the eyes of other professionals, what that would look like. Now that would grow over time, would change over time. But in my initial year or so with Tulsa, that was a real issue and concern, and that was something I was constantly fighting in myself, of reminding myself of my confidence, of what I knew, of the success of the programs, and talking myself through that at times. But it was definitely something that struck me very early on, and something frankly I would not have anticipated.
Well, I can't speak for Jennifer, but I'm pretty sure she'd be on the same page. As I mentioned this when you told me this before, I had no clue, and you hit it very well. Because I mean, I looked at you in awe. I mean, this dynamo leader. So you did well. Whatever was going on the inside was not coming out on the outside.
Yes.
So that was this. Tulsa was the start. The full-time leadership start. And then let's talk about where you went, or well, let's talk about your MPA first. Let's talk about getting your MPA. So, and how that kind of played into everything.
Uh, Absolutely. When I was with Tulsa, they had a program where they had small grants. I think it was $1,000 a semester that they would give out to staff for continuing education. And I certainly took advantage of that. And I would encourage anyone listening that when you join an organization, part of what you want to ask them is, what are your career development opportunities? What are you going to receive from them as much as they from you? That helped financially with me starting my MPA program. I knew that I wanted to grow I really thought I was going to grow up in the Red Cross itself, but I know I needed additional education. And that $1,000 funding was a big deal back then when, I was recently married. We had a young son going to school, working, for the Red Cross there. It was a challenge. But as many of you who are in graduate programs already know, when I came into that program, I was 23, 24, and there were a cadre of us about the same age, but the vast majority of the persons in the class were individuals who were in mid-career. They worked in government. One was a police officer, another worked for the state. And it was incredible to sit and listen to their experiences. And that was absolutely as important as, the actual curriculum we were learning. So I found that invaluable to be surrounded again by people that are smarter than I am, had more experience. But I went into that program because I wanted to expand beyond the early successes I had. And eventually that would find me in DC. And so a quick note, John, you were talking about networking. And very early on, I signed up for a program, an outside group, to teach me to find work. And I thought it was going to be a headhunter kind of thing. And instead, it was an organization that taught you how to network. And that has been critical throughout my career, uh, building those relationships, coming into, cold calls into individuals saying, hey, I'm interested in your type of work. Here's my resume or CV. Can you give me feedback on, my strengths, what I need to build upon, informational interviews. And that was critical, both in terms of uh, it it prevented a wall coming up saying, hey, I want a job. Can you do this for me? But really was hey, I need your knowledge. Can you give me that? And people were very open to do that. And that has carried on throughout my career, that type of building relationships. And the other is reciprocity. So I highly encourage people that I work with of setting up reciprocal relationships with each other. And that can be something as silly as when I take someone out to lunch, then they buy me lunch next time, and building that trust. So that would lead me to DC. I would work there for a couple of years, and I would move out to LA. My vice president in DC had become the CEO in Los Angeles, and because of our working relationship, asked me to come and join him um, in in uh, in LA. So that was kind of my launch of my adult career, I suppose, and leading into my first operational and organizational wide managerial role.
So let's talk about that. So networking is a big piece. It gets you to go from one coast to the other, and step into a COO position with the American Red Cross LA. And so first how did you feel about that?
Oh,
Like,
I was absolutely thrilled. I'd never been to Los Angeles, big city, new place. My mentor, my CEO, believed in me. I was now in the Red Cross at a national level. I was thrilled to absolutely jump into that seat and figure it out as I went.
so we got rid of the imposter syndrome. We're not dealing with that issue anymore. We're fully fledged. I mean, that's how a career should progress. But I'm just, wanted to make sure that no trepidations, you're raring to go.
Yes and no. Certainly, I was much more confident in my background and experience in education at that point. But again, I had never overseen human resources in IT and fleet and facilities and our programs of disaster relief and the training and education piece. That was all new to me. And so it was a very steep learning curve for me to come in and not just understand those functions, but also understand how I needed to help them be successful and help them achieve the mission that they were focused on. So yes, there was that aspect of, oh my gosh, colloquialism talking about drinking from a fire hydrant. Well, it was, but it was also not trial by fire, but I was in the crucible. So, I was learning fast and furious, and it was very exhilarating.
And so this, when we talk the specific skill sets that kind of that maybe some of the things you didn't have experience in, but learned on the job and became experienced in for future roles,
Mhm.
were the HR management part. You had some experience with budget only because I remember you constantly going over the budget at a very smaller, much smaller scale, right? In youth services, communications, IT, finance, and negotiating. Can you expound on some of those roles?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I'll go back to hiring the best and smartest people to be around you, or finding that those fellow travelers along the way. Certainly, there are all kinds of different studies about leadership and what it is and what it isn't, and how you maximize it. And for me, it really meant that I needed to listen a lot and make sure I understood the individuals I were working with, the challenges we were facing, the opportunities. So it required a lot of listening up front. And only after that listening, then really to start to formulate, what our strategy would be for whatever we are working on. And then only after that would become the implementation piece. So the biggest liability, but also the biggest strength of any organization are the people that work there. And that is something that I never leave out of the equation. But yes, managing, mentoring was part of what I was growing into, how to mentor, how to develop staff, how to work with boards. I had not worked with boards before. And the Red Cross had a very strong board, and I was presenting different programmatic ideas, different directions for the organization to that board. And I needed to stand up, provide the presentations, take questions, defend my talking points, and work closely with them, because boards are volunteers in the community. They're not paid. They serve on these boards because they believe in the mission of the organization. But they're there for a policy and oversight capacity. It can be intimidating if you've not worked with the board before. So that was absolutely critical. And yes, John, budgets became more complicated. Funding streams became larger and more complex. And also building relationships in the community with other agencies was critical, both on the government side of disaster relief, but also in terms of working with fundraising and building those partnerships in the community with other businesses.
Going kind of off what you were saying is, as you're starting into all these new areas of management,
Mhm.
where would you say that you found in those various areas, what tended to be the one that provided maybe the most challenges or obstacles or maybe
Mhm.
learning curve specific?
Mhm. Mhm. I, I think they all come with their challenges. Certainly, I think that human resources and staffing is one of the most complex areas. Not just because you're dealing with, state regulations of wage and hour laws, things like that, but you're also dealing with people, and people are very complex, and bring all of their personal life into their work in terms of perspective and understanding and diversity. And so it's a very complex It requires a lot of attention and a lot of time. Again, a lot of listening, having to make some really tough choices at times. Some that you would prefer uh, we didn't have to go there, but for instance, in separating staff from the organization, difficult thing to do. It affects them, their families, and but as a leader, those are some of the complications and responsibilities that you have to take on.
So would you say, I mean, going on a different vein, so as you're moving, so you're at the American Red Cross in LA, and then that kind of starts you have this new experience, new role as COO, which, as you mentioned, depending on the nonprofit, depended on what that meant, what that role meant.
Mhm.
So you went to a few other nonprofits, stayed within the kind of the Southern California area.
Mhm.
So how important is who you know versus what you know
Mhm.
when you're going for some of these jobs?
Mhm. Yeah. From DC to LA, Red Cross to UCP, the next organization I'd worked for, and then to ECF. I moved from those organizations to the next, all because I knew individuals working for that next organization, their CEO or their staff. So again, it was that networking that really would provide me for those transitional opportunities. And again, very critical, I think. Uh, Coming into those roles, again, as you said, meant different things to different organizations. In one organization, I would set up a fundraising department because it didn't exist. In another organization, I would work with external and internal IT on, transformation of very large, complex data systems. So it depended, but it was critical for me to be successful. If I was going to be, then I needed to be willing to learn. I needed to be willing to, for myself, take risks. And that meant coming in and saying, you know what, I don't know a lot about this. I want to learn about it. An example would be in the developmental disabilities community. When I came into that organization at UCP, I knew zero about the developmental disabilities community. And it was a very steep learning curve, both in terms of clinical diagnosis, but also mental and behavioral health, how it was affecting communities, where funding came from. And I was very fortunate that I had staff around me and who reported up to me who were willing to take the time and to educate me. But it was critical that when I came in, I was very honest and transparent and would say at times, I know nothing about this, but I want to learn about it. Can you help me? And that would help me grow. One of the things that I do strongly believe in is when I hire, I want to hire not necessarily on skill sets that they have to be there, a base of them have to be there, but I want to hire based on the person, meaning to say, I can train my staff to do almost anything, that transactional kind of work. But what I cannot necessarily train them to be is to be that leadership. I can mentor and grow them, but I'd prefer finding those folks very early on. And John's an example of that, and so is Jennifer. Hire for leadership, hire for um, uh, the desire to try new things, to take risks. And taking risk was also a big part of what I was doing too. I was poking into areas I knew may be a little challenging, but I was willing to put that foot in the river, so to speak. And if it didn't work out, I could pull back very quickly. I didn't overcommit, but I always challenge my staff to take risk, to be risk takers. That's where the innovation comes from. And that's also where the creativity and really that team comes together.
I think that resonates with me only because of working with you for 4 years. Is I remember specifically there was one point where I had developed the programs. They were going well. One of them had already been nationally recognized, and an award had been given. And I remember you had to talk to me. It's like, okay, John, it's time to empower um, the youth volunteers to take a stronger leadership role
Mhm.
in those programs. And I wasn't okay with that because it's meant turning over the control
Scary.
It is scary. But turns out, of course, you were right, and was extremely worthwhile because it gave them the opportunity to not only be successful, but also to fail and learn from those lessons. But in turn, I mean, but at the end of the day, it was a highly successful
Hmm.
way to do things.
Hmm. Yeah, it turned out wonderfully. Like you said, there were national awards being given to us and funding, and it was a really exciting time.
So before we open it up to questions, let's talk about what you started doing during COVID, which was nonprofit consulting.
Mhm.
So what did you do? What do you do currently in the nonprofit consulting?
Mhm. Yes, and my role going into the consulting sphere did come out of COVID. The organization I was working for lost a lot of funding because of COVID, and I would find myself moving out of that organization. I still wanted to stay connected to the nonprofit world. I was taking care of some things on my family side with that needed my attention full time, but I wanted to stay connected, and I wanted to continue to uh, be able to give my talents, but also to work with organizations. And what that meant was joining an organization called Catch a Fire, which is a nonprofit organization that matches other nonprofits with seasoned executive nonprofit managers. And usually it's on a very project-based uh, relationship interaction. And as you mentioned, I've worked with organizations in Africa, in Australia. I've worked with small organizations in the US, meaning, $100,000 budget up to larger organizations with $39 million budgets. And their needs differed. Some just wanted to have a review of their financials. Others needed someone to develop a board packet, policy manual for staff. It just really depended. And I think I did that well and I enjoyed it because I had this very broad experience in nonprofit management. I knew the connectivity between, HR and IT and fleet, and as we've talked about, but I also understood the organizations for how boards interacted with the CEO and executive management and middle management all the way to the front line. So I felt like I could bring a very broad understanding of nonprofit management, how it worked, as well as what it meant from again the very top of the organization to those doing the frontline work. And that did allow me to work, with different organizations and different needs of different sizes. And I've really enjoyed it. I'm still doing some of that work right now. And it is just, much like John was saying, it's so energizing to be able to empower others to be successful, to help them along that way. So it's been a great experience. I am looking at this time to come back full time into a COO role with a nonprofit. And I've been in conversations with one. I think it's just time for me to come back into that full-time work. But I'll bring certainly my experiences in consulting with me as I do that.
Well, before I turn it over to questions, is there anything else you wanted to add?
No, I would go back to the MPA program for just a
Yeah.
moment. And, as I described, I was the young kid, wet behind the ears, learning lots from individuals who were in mid-career. I chose to take my MPA and continue in the nonprofit world, but obviously MPA programs can develop individuals for lots of different opportunities out there, whether it be working in, federal, state, local governments, certainly nonprofits, other international NGOs. So I'm a strong believer in the MPA program. I've seen the opportunities it's afforded me, but I also, for individuals who are entering programs or in mid program, really to look beyond, just one thing that degree can do because it encompasses a lot. The other thing I would say about getting your MPA or just graduate degree is it's in my perspective, when I got out of high school, having a bachelor's degree got you into the world. And now my perspective is now a graduate degree is what opens that door for you. And the majority of organizations I've worked for have required advanced degrees to come into that management role. And you don't necessarily have to be wanting to be in management to be in nonprofits. You may have a very specific focus on mental health and working with clients. But if you're going to be operating on a very, if your desire is to operate on an executive level, then you will need that advanced degree. And the MPA is great for that. I would also encourage other, graduate degrees, but that's certainly something that's critical. And as well as I'll just throw in that, the concept of lifelong learning and always seeking out opportunities to learn more, whether it be in your professional life or outside. That is going to drive careers. I believe it has mine. And I would encourage, folks to really think about what that means. Does it mean learning a new language because that's fun? Is it something, to do with technology? But understand and be aware that you will need to continually develop yourself and learn as you go through your career, both to be successful, but also to be competitive.
Thank you. Well, as I mentioned when we started, the whole transformative networking piece, I've had the privilege of being able to dip into my network many times over the years of my career in higher ed, for guest speakers and partners and collaborators in my programs. But because this is the man that got me started in doing stuff like the career pathways and the dissertation writing camp and developing those programs, this has been, I think, as I said, the pinnacle of that. So thank you so much, Clark. And if I can ask Cynthia to stop the recording, we will open it up for questions.